You're listening to Sports Entertainment Awareness, bringing you the best in professional wrestling coverage of WWE Raw, WWE SmackDown, WWE NXT, AEW, and backstage wrestling news.
Our mission is to bring pro wrestling further into the mainstream with weekly coverage, history, wrestling news, and opinions on the sport of professional wrestling.
I'm Josh.
I'm Jonah.
And welcome to Sports Entertainment Awareness. It is a new month. It's a new week. It's new. Everything's new. We took a couple weeks off. I got to go up to a cottage.
Got a glorious tan.
Now a sunburn. Oh yeah, my knees look like Neapolitan ice cream where they're like white and then brown and then red.
Chapman's ice cream.
So now that we're done screwing around, let's tell you what we're going to talk about. Punk and Drew and Punk's new contract. There's lots going on with Punk. There's lots going on with Drew. We see that Drew is also going to be in the Killing Game. We're going to talk about the latest on Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan. We'll also go into All In. Let's get into it. So Jonah, is Punk's new contract in the process? Is it out? What's happening with his new contract?
I believe it's in the process. When news like this gets leaked, it's either coming from Punk, who's a millionaire, or WWE, who's a billion-dollar company. So someone's using the wrestling media as a form of leverage in negotiations. I think Punk resigns, so I think this is a very open and shut. I think WWE wants him as much as Punk wants them. So I think this will be wrapped up probably pretty quickly.
There was a rumor about him trying to bring back April.
I think it's possible April, aka AJ Lee.
Before we continue, I just realized that Ape and Phil are Bam Margera's parents, but April is AJ Lee's real name and Phil is CM Punk's real name, so they need a kid named Bam Margera. But let's go back to what we were talking about. I got sidebarred.
I think it's possible AJ Lee comes back. I think it's a dream match for a lot of the younger female wrestlers who grew up watching both Punk and AJ. Do I think it will happen? 50-50. She's busy with other projects right now. Hey, we all said Punk would never come back, and here we are.
Was it Stardom or was it another Japanese women's wrestling promotion that she was a writer for and she was doing some backstage work for?
I think it was a reinvention of Glow, but she was some head of creative or had some sort of backstage producer role. She's always kind of been involved in wrestling. She just hasn't stepped foot in a ring in a very long time. I think if she's going to come back, though, it's probably going to be Royal Rumble season.
You're right. It was Women of Wrestling promotion, an executive producer in October 2021, and she was there till 23, so she's no longer there.
I think she has a new production studio she's opening up. So, again, I think if she's going to come back, it'll probably be Rumble time. She's going to want to work with Punk, take off the rust. Maybe they'll do to her what they did with Rock and fly out some NXT talent, fly her a ring, since that pop could be deafening and probably the loudest pop since Rock came back.
Here's what I think with her. We know that Punk is happy with his contract and happy with the way the organization is being run. He just said that he wouldn't have left if it was run the way it was 10 years ago.
Oh God, no. He would have just retired after AEW.
Obviously, she sees that the writing is on the wall for her and he could have it in his contract that she's hired as well. In terms of money, I don't know how many people would remember her, but I think a lot of people do, and a lot of people would also realize that that's CM Punk's wife, for one. And two, I think there's opportunity here.
I'd say this, keep in mind, AJ Lee is also someone I'd consider my era. Like, CM Punk for a long time was my second favorite wrestler behind John Cena. I fully supported his decision to leave. Everything else after I have a little bit of mixed feelings about. But a lot of people would remember AJ Lee. It's not AJ Lee's fault or anyone's fault at the time that WWE just sucked and Vince didn't take the women's division seriously, or the Divas division as it was known at the time. And listen, 2010s is when the company started to really, really go downhill. You lost Danielson, you lost Punk, you lost a lot of other talented wrestlers. People were getting burnt out by Cena, and everybody hated Roman at that point. I think people would remember AJ Lee. It's just 2010s wrestling sucked for the most part.
The only time I ever saw her was it wrestling Paige at WrestleMania 31?
Yeah, I think she did wrestle Paige at WrestleMania 31. I know Paige also got the belt off her during one of the post-Raw Manias, so maybe that's what you're thinking of.
And then she was gone soon after that.
Relatively, yeah.
Now, sure, there's ring rust, but she's had 10 years where there hasn't been a lot of injuries because she hasn't been in the ring. I bet you she could still go. Now, I'm looking at the women's roster right now, and I can almost cherry pick who I'd like to see her wrestle.
Rhea Ripley.
Rhea Ripley, Abby the Witch, who we used to know as Nikki Cross, Asuka, Candice LeRae. I think she would do good things with like Bianca Belair or Jade Cargill. Chelsea Green, she'd do great things with. Indy Hartwell, she'd do good things with.
Tiffany Stratton.
They could call up Gigi Dolan for her. Io Sky. She could put on a clinic with a bunch of people. She doesn't need a belt.
She'd be a draw just by existing at this point.
Okay, how tall is AJ Lee?
5'3", 5'4".
So she's 5'3", 5'4". Let's Google it. 1.57 meters in feet is a number that I don't know.
I'm telling you, bro, if I get this spot on.
5.1 and a half. I had a feeling you were a little too high for her. So she's 5'1" and about 104, 105 pounds. Do you know who would be perfect for her?
Who?
Nia Jax.
Nia Jax would kill her.
Maybe, but Nia Jax, Piper Niven, because of her size, WWE has always been good in that, like...
David versus Goliath.
Exactly. So you put her against somebody that's a lot larger than her, and it becomes believable that you want to see her overcome it, and you don't know how she's going to do it, and then she overcomes it. That's how people buy in on her that haven't seen her before.
Well, she's... For older fans like me, she'll probably be babyface the whole time.
I think so, and you put her up against some monster heel, she'll do great things. You put her up against somebody that's her size or close to her size, you'll see a lot of different work rate matches.
You know what? Maybe her and Punk do the wrestling thing for 2 to 4 years and then they retire together.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they could really get some money and time out of her, putting her up against bigger women. So we were initially talking about Punk's contract. What's he getting? What's his current...
I don't know the number, but I'd say probably higher than Rollins, lower than Cody and Roman. Somewhere in that ballpark. Before merch sales.
His current deal is kept under wraps. He was making $1.5 million in AEW, so he's got to be at least getting 2, I would think.
Well, keep in mind, though, his contract is also short term, so this is why negotiations are suddenly coming up very quickly, right?
Essentially, Sports is reporting his $12 million, but who knows if that's true?
Again, I don't think he'd probably make as much as Roman or Cody.
Agreed. Okay, he's 45.
So he probably has about 3 more years left.
If that. He got some time away. He did some other things. I don't foresee him wanting to wrestle that far into his 50s.
Well, this is my thing. I think late 40s, maybe early 50s, if someone comes up or there's a good enough story by then. But he's closer to the end than the beginning, and I think everybody kind of knows that.
Yeah, this is kind of his goodbye run. If you think about it, too, he was always the guy complaining that part-timers were coming in and taking over the show.
Which he was right about.
So, if he were to reduce his schedule and become that part-timer that took over the show, I don't think that would be good for him either, because that shows you he's a bit of a hypocrite.
Yeah, but again, wrestling's full of hypocrites. And besides, I honestly think Punk, to his credit, going all the way back to Ring of Honor, his first run in WWE, AEW run, he's always had a history of wanting to give back and work with younger talent. And I think it's possible he takes over the head of creative role for NXT or becomes some very high-end producer or trainer down in Florida.
He would do well in a corporate role, especially in a talent relations role.
I don't think he wants that, though. He's never been a corporate guy. That's why I'm saying I think he'd want to be a trainer.
The other thing is this. He's got a personality issue. He's famous for getting in fights with people, and they'd have to be very careful who and what he fights with, because, he could piss off a lot of their talent.
I'd say this. One, when it comes to Punk leaving WWE the first time, he was right about 99% of that. He should have been pissed off about the way he was being booked. He was burnt out mentally. He was burnt out emotionally. And if you don't trust the doctors, especially for something like WWE or anything very high intensity athletic, then it's very hard to function as an employee in that environment. When it comes to the AEW stuff, yes, Punk is a victim of that, but some of that is also Tony Khan not knowing how to diffuse a situation properly. Some of that could also be a little bit of the elite being a little bit difficult and stubborn. I'm not saying Punk is obviously clean of any issues. In that regard, I think they're all equally at fault. But by every single measure, Punk is a good guy. By every single measure, he's never had any actual real toxic baggage. So, I don't know. I think WWE sees him as too much of an asset at this point. Clearly, him and Trips get along well enough too. So, Michaels will probably retire and he'll be the new head of creative in NXT.
It's funny because for a long time, Triple H was the one vying for Punk to get fired.
Oh, yeah.
And now they see what a draw he is and they see what's needed and what he can do. And you saw the numbers for AEW change when he was on the card.
He's always been a draw. This is the thing with him. When he was that white hot summer of Punk, in the early 2010s when he just beat John Cena. He was great. He was fantastic. I loved Punk. I bought a Punk Nexus shirt. It's just that Vince always hated Punk for whatever reasons. I think they just saw wrestling and life extremely differently. Sure enough, Punk was right.
Punk never had the look or the build that Vince wanted. He always wanted the bigger, tougher, jacked All-Americans.
He didn't see where the industry was going, and it bit him in the ass. And it goes back to what we were talking about the week before with Cena, which is that, once again, Vince could not build a second credible babyface. I know Punk wouldn't be a traditional babyface, but there's your second star right there.
That was in an episode that we ended up not publishing, right?
The Cena episode?
Yeah.
No, we published it like a week or two ago, maybe 3 now.
I thought there was one that we record. Was it the third episode? Because there was one we recorded that we scrapped because
no, it was the second one because we were talking about Cena's retirement tour.
True. That was a long time ago. My brain is foggy. But yes, we did talk about not having a viable number 2 for Cena, and when they put somebody in like a Punk who could have been a viable number 2, they bit themselves in the ass in it.
Or Danielson, but again, either way, they had their chance with Punk. They shot themselves in the foot. Granted, some of that was also Triple H. But bottom line is, I like Punk. I've always liked Punk. I do think some criticisms of him are valid. He's not leaving WWE. I think at this point it's either WWE or retire.
Agreed. So let's move on to our next topic. We do have another opportunity to talk about somebody that's facing Punk. So speaking of Punk and Drew, it looks like Drew is going to be part of, what's this movie called? We just looked it up and I've already fried.
The Killer's Game.
The Killer's Game, starring Dave Bautista. Did I say that right?
I walk alone inside this pit of danger.
I walk alone.
Still one of the best entrance themes they've ever had.
Oh yeah, when he used to come out and move his hands and all the pyro would go off.
Oh, and they were like machine guns. It was sick.
So this is far from the first wrestler to ever be in a movie. Andre the Giant was in The Princess Bride. Hulk Hogan was in a bunch of movies. I think he was a nanny in one movie.
They were all terrible for the record.
Oh, they all were. Ox Baker. John Cena's been in a bunch of movies. Dwayne Johnson. Roddy Piper. I don't know why Randy Couture is on this list. Was he ever in a WWE ring?
No, he was a UFC guy though, so maybe that's why I got confused.
I don't know who this Paul Levesque is.
Levesque?
Levesque?
What's a Levesque?
I don't know. It says he was in this movie, The Chaperone.
I saw that. It was actually terrible.
Yeah, I didn't watch it.
Good call.
I don't watch Triple H movies. Steve Austin, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash, Glenn Jacobs, who is Kane, Lenny Montana. I didn't know he was a wrestler. Interesting. Jesse Ventura, Bill Goldberg, The Undertaker was in Suburban Commando. I always forget that. Mick Foley was in the Peanut Butter Falcon. You're allergic to that movie?
Yes, I am.
This is not the first wrestler to go off and do movies.
No, it's not. And I honestly don't think it'll be the last. I think one thing that makes the modern product very different than the older product is that wrestlers these days focus so much more on the storytelling aspect that they have a basic fundamentals of acting and how to get people to care about your character and where to go and the character progression. And so it's a lot more of a science to it.
Mm-hmm. A lot of wrestlers go to acting school and don't do well in it. Like, I think Cody did not last in acting school and he went back to wrestling.
I think he just couldn't make it as an actor, period. And I don't think he hated acting per se, because remember, he also was a villain in the CW show Arrow, and he also has a appearance in an upcoming film. I forget exactly what film, but I don't think he hates acting per se.
It's not his bread and butter, and he can't connect with people the same way. Now, more wrestlers go off and act a little bit and then come back. Many of them don't stay in acting. For every Rock or for every Dave Bautista, there's a John Cena that bounces back and forth. Or there's a Steve Austin that goes and does a couple of movies. Or there's Randy Savage who does a one-off in Spider-Man. Randy Savage also did some voice acting on King of the Hill.
Ooh, yeah.
It's that episode where Bill buys that home gym from the high school, and then these guys come and work out at his house, and one of them is Randy Savage. But where I'm going with this is a lot of people stay in wrestling. I think The Rock knew that his bread was buttered in acting, and he could come back and wrestle, and this way he wouldn't beat up his body. Dave Bautista in 2002 was already in his mid-30s. So I don't think that him going 20 years in wrestling and wrestling into his 50s was going to be conducive, because he was already 10 years older than Orton, 10 years older than Brock, 10 years older than some of the guys that came up in that class.
Well, and speaking of age, just as a sort of off-topic, on-topic comment, that's why Jade Cargill also left AEW, right? She loves it, she loved AEW, but when you're 30, you're getting your start in wrestling at a relatively older age.
Oh yeah, you can go to the big show and get all kinds of exposure you want, where there's all kinds of money being thrown at you, or you can go to the B or the C show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense, and you know what? You got to do what's best for you. You can't stick around a wrestling show beat up and working people that are taking years off your life.
It's a very difficult business when you get started at that old of an age, so I don't blame Batista or Cargill. But as far as wrestlers going back and forth goes, I think that's what's going to happen with Becky Lynch. I think she's just kind of resting right now. I think you'll see her do a couple acting bits, and then she'll come back to WWE, maybe do one more final run. I think that's also what's going to happen with Rollins.
Has she been announced for any movies?
She hasn't been announced, no, but I'm just assuming because she hasn't signed a contract, and I have a very difficult time believing she would go to AEW. I think if that was going to happen, something would have leaked or it would have been signed by now.
Mm-hmm. Now, back to what we were talking about with wrestlers being older. Most wrestlers do their best work in their 20s into their 30s. Like, they build up the work rate, they build up the experience, and then they're like grizzled young vets in their 30s. And by 40, 50, they're ready to slow down. Most wrestlers are not like Diamond Dallas Page, who gets into wrestling in their mid-30s and then just continues to do it and gets to that top level.
DDP is more of an exception than the norm.
Exactly. You know, by the time you're 30, your body's deteriorated. Unless you've been an athlete for all that time, there's some wear and tear, there's some pre-existing injuries, and then you're doing something that's going to make you even more injured.
I think you'll see Liv Morgan jump ship to do acting at some point. You'll probably see Rhea Ripley jump ship. Roman Reigns was off doing that movie for Keke Palmer. That's one of the reasons he's been off TV for as long as he has been. I think Cody will eventually do a little bit more acting. He clearly does like it to some extent. And it's, again, the basic fundamentals of storytelling. This is where we're going. This is what we want to do. This is how it's going to end. Beginning, middle, end. Same as wrestling.
You know, Endeavor is not just a company that owns companies. They're also a talent agency.
I think Tiffany Stratton just signed to them as a talent.
Interesting. So they need that roster of big, scary men and women to put in movies to be bad guys.
To be bad guys, but also look at their roster. They're all extremely good looking on both the male and female side. They don't call it movie star good looks for no reason.
You know who I would like to see go off and be an actor, and I think it would be really good for him?
Yeah.
Braun Strowman.
You know what? He's a big, scary guy. The beard kind of makes him intimidating. I think if you get him to shave the head, he'd be like a really good enforcer bodyguard for a more seasoned actor, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, he just has to stand there and look scary and do some combat stuff. You know, he'd be great in sci-fi. He'd be great in mob and war movies. I don't see him having a lot of range or depth, but that's the kind of typecasting that's not the end of the world. You know what? He's 40.
Yeah, he's getting up there in age. He had a very bad back injury, and those do some real damage on you.
Have you seen the way he walks and moves the last year or so?
It's extremely different. NBA player Dwight Howard got a back surgery. Wasn't the same. His career went steadily downhill ever since.
Now he's also 6'7", 6'8", and 375.
Dwight Howard was about the same, maybe closer to 6'10", 6'11", but...
So that weight is not good for your knees. And you can see by the way he walks, he's having problems with at least his knees and maybe his hips. You see him run out to the ring and run around, and it's not as fast as it once was.
Big guys don't do well when it comes to back surgeries. Unfortunately, there's a very steady decline in your athletic ability after a very serious injury like that.
Did they also fuse something in his neck? Am I remembering that correctly?
I think it's possible. I mean, look, speaking of neck fusions, if that's true with Strowman, look at what happened to Big E.
That might be who I'm remembering. I'm literally Googling this right now. Braun Strowman injuries. He required a neck fusion surgery after an in-ring incident that comprised his spinal column. Was wrongfully struck, causing his head to snap back and momentarily paralyze his arms due to the severe spinal stenosis between his C4 and C5 vertebrae.
So he probably only has about 3 more years. So Strowman probably has 3 more years. As sad as it is, I also think Big E's done.
Now I'm looking at July 19th. Braun Strowman suffers knee injury, requires medical follow-up. So did I not just say his knees were not so good either?
I say he has 2 more years, maybe 3 if he's lucky.
You know what? Now would be the time to put the U.S. title on him as a transitional champion. Let him go over some smaller guys and then let somebody big like a Braun Breaker go over him. Let him go out on his back. Let him go to acting. Let him heal up. He's not at a point anymore where he can provide the value that he once did. And he's not at a point anymore where he's not that ring worthy. He goes out and he moves slower, he gets injured, It's better for him to be off TV.
Well, and then speaking of, because we were talking about Punk earlier and how I think Punk could be like a head of creative or whatever, I don't see Strowman wanting to do a sort of trainer role. I don't see him wanting to do a creative role. I could see maybe Nick Khan going to Ari Emanuel and saying, listen, I have this big scary guy. He'd be great for movies. His in-ring career is basically done. Can you send someone to help him?
Yeah, and you know what? It would be the right time and it would be the right move for him. I remember when he debuted.
With the Wyatt family, oh, he was great with the black sheep mask, too.
First, you saw his timing was a little off, and you could see he was a little unsure of himself. But within 6 months, because he debuted around Survivor Series, didn't he? Within 6 months of that match, you could see his timing had picked up. He'd picked up speed. He came in bulky, and he cut, and he was looking a little better.
Also helps he was working with two other big guys who are also veterans with Luke Harper and Eric Rowan.
Oh, yeah, and you know what? Even by that point, Bray Wyatt, I don't know if you would call him a veteran, but he was in a good spot. And that same year, they just put him against The Undertaker, which tells you he knows his stuff. And at the same time, he had that, like, multi-generational knowledge.
You mentioned Bray Wyatt. I'm obligated to start crying.
Like, if you were raised by IRS, who was always a decent mid-carder, and then the Wyndham family, like Barry and Blackjack Mulligan, you got a lot of knowledge imparted to you, and it meant that you got to spend time with people that other people hadn't, because you followed your dad or your uncle to the shows, and next thing you know, you're meeting these legends.
Strowman probably just also needed that vote of confidence. I can see someone like him, who looks like a good guy for all intents and purposes, being very hard on himself and doubting everything he does, and sometimes we just all need that vote of confidence from someone more experienced than us.
Now, Strowman already has some movie experience.
What has he done?
I watched that one Sherlock Holmes movie that came out a few years ago.
The one with, not Benedict Cumberbatch. I forget which one, but I know there was one.
It might be the one with Benedict Cumberbatch.
I thought that was a TV show.
No, he was in something. I could be wrong. Oh, no. You know who was in it? Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. So it was basically like Step Brothers, but they're Sherlock Holmes and Watson.
Step Brothers is the greatest movie of all time.
It's all about the Catalina wine mixer.
It's the Catalina wine mixer.
You know what's wild to me?
What?
The fact that AEW would do something like a War Games or a Blood and Guts style match on Dynamite.
I don't hate the idea. I think it's also AEW is nowhere near as shy when it comes to like blood and violence in wrestling matches as WWE is. I think there's a certain level of violence you see in both the men's and women's division of AEW that you're never going to see in WWE.
I said the same thing when they did that Ospreay and MJF match. That was an hour long and it was a great title match, but they gave that away for free.
You know why though, and I've mentioned this to you before. So, and I'm saying this for the audience. WBD owns TNT and TBS. And as it's been pretty well known, if you are an NBA fan, TNT has recently been let go by the NBA. They're going to Amazon and TNT is now suing them. But if you're AEW, this is great because now it puts you in a stronger position because WBD is more desperate for you. And so a match like Will Ospreay and MJF, where it's a 60-minute banger, it's like, oh my God, these ratings are great. Wow, we need to pay them more. I think you're already starting to see AEW on their streaming service, HBO Max.
They're also trying to get Ring of Honor listed on WBD as well. So they're clearly trying to get the eyes on them. They're trying to get their ratings up. I thought that Blood and Guts was a good match, but I was a little bit apprehensive.
Why?
The unprotected chair shot. Was that when his hands were chained up?
And Darby hits him. I have very mixed feelings when it comes to unprotected chair shots. On one hand, I do like to think they do every single safety precaution you possibly can. And at the end of the day, in any wrestling match whatsoever, you do run the risk of injury. Like, again, Big E was just taking a belly-to-belly suplex, and now his career is over because of a neck fusion. There's always a risk in wrestling. That's reality. But, all that being said, unprotected chair shots, especially knowing what we know about concussions in 2024, they make me wince. I still don't believe there's a place in wrestling for them.
Jonah, it's July 28th, 2024 as we're recording this. We've had 17 years now of concussion conversations.
You're talking to an NHL and NFL fan. Trust me, I get it.
Like the Benoit thing happened in 2007 and they started looking into concussions differently then.
NFL lost $4 to $6 billion in a concussion lawsuit.
Now there's a difference between hurting somebody doing something like a pile driver and you do it wrong and then you drop the guy on his head, Owen Hart, or Samoa Joe dropping, was it Tyson Kidd?
Something like that, yeah.
Natalia's husband, let's see, is it Tyson Kidd?
Yeah, Cody also, I remember, took an unprotected chair shot to the head when he was in AEW. I think Lance Archer gave it to him.
But what I'm getting to is that we know better.
We do know better. I'm a little bit surprised Tony Khan did greenlight that. Again, at the end of the day, these are grown adults. It's their lives, their choices. I mean, in a sense, what's worse, that or Darby Allin jumping 20 feet in the air through panes of glass? They might be different, sure, but both are in a way equally irresponsible.
Jack Perry and Darby Allin are two guys that I think you're going to see have short careers, or maybe too many accidents and something happens, or maybe they just deteriorate after they wrestle.
I don't think Darby Allin's ever going to die, dude. He survived being hit by a bus.
Both of those guys show no regard for their body, and it's going to create a problem. And these are things that the WWE, for better or for worse, have looked to cut out for years.
Well, and this is kind of the thing. Sometimes you have to protect the wrestlers from themselves. It's like, I respect and appreciate the amount of creative freedom AEW has, and like I think sometimes it's great. Like that Hangman vs. Swerve death match at Full Gear about a year ago is great. It's incredible. But there is a certain level of violence in AEW that is just generally more accepted than WWE ever will. I don't know if that's because the sponsorship thing. I don't know if it's because one's more of a PG product than the other. Maybe it's somewhere in between. But I do think the chair shots should be gone. That being said, I do also believe that at the end of the day, Jack Perry's a grown man. He can do what he wants with his body. And if he wants to take an unprotected chair shot and everybody's okay with it.
Okay, if you run a wrestling promotion, you realize that you're bringing in a whole bunch of whack jobs that are no fear and no regard for their safety and the safety of others. And I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying that you're going to get some of those guys in wrestling.
It's reality, yes.
It takes a special type of individual to get into a wrestling ring and do any of the things these guys do. And for every safe worker, there's somebody that's okay hurting others. And for every safe worker, there's somebody that's okay absolutely taking a beating of his own body. Just jumping onto concrete, diving off of cages, going through thumbtacks. I'm thinking about Mick Foley specifically.
Wrestling is inherently dangerous.
Yes. But there's a level of danger that you can create for yourself and be okay with. And if you're a leader for a wrestling company or an owner or a manager, you have to be the one to say, okay, I don't want you using real glass. I don't want you using thumbtacks. I don't want you taking chair shots to the head. These guys are going to do it whether you let them do it or not. But if you set the rules, it's also to protect you and your fans. The last thing you want is somebody to die in the ring, 100,000 people to record it. Oh, granted, AEW can't fill in a 100,000 person arena. Next thing you know, it's all over and all kinds of lawsuits are coming up. My husband died in the ring. I'm suing for all this kinds of money. My kids watched the match and now they're traumatized. I'm suing.
Hey, the only reason I generally believe WWE survived the Owen Hart thing is because that happened in 96, 97.
98 or 99.
Even still, recording technology was super basic back then, and so it's a lot easier to stop that footage from getting out. I know I'm talking about NFL a lot, but when that Bills player, Damar Hamlin, almost died on the football field, if he actually died, that's a PR nightmare that the NFL would have a very hard time coming back from. And if a $30 billion corporation like the NFL would have a hard time with one of their people dying, imagine what it would be like for the WWE or AEW.
So let's talk about somebody dying in the ring for a second, and that's a very morbid thought to have.
Well, it works in the context.
Now, when it happened at Over the Edge, it was on a pay-per-view. It wasn't on a network, right? If you have somebody on Dynamite die in the middle of the ring, what does that mean from TNT? Can TNT sue you because you were unsafe and you damaged their reputation? Because at some point,
They could sue, but again, they're in negotiation deal, so they might just say, screw it, we'll let the deal expire. And
okay. I'm going to use two hypothetical wrestlers because I don't want to use anybody's, active right now. Let's say the Boogeyman kills Hornswoggle in the middle of the ring.
Okay.
On TNT television,
really?
Right?
Sure, fine. I will entertain this.
It means that TNT just inadvertently broadcasted somebody's death. And it creates a sense of negligence both for AEW. Who's doing who's killing? Was it the Boogeyman that killed Hornswoggle in this example? Is that what I just said?
I think it should be the other way around.
I think you're right, but regardless, it means that there's lawsuit openings for three different people. Tony Khan in AEW, the person that accidentally killed the other guy in the ring, and the company that broadcasted it on national television. that would create not just a huge PR loss nightmare, but that could have long-lasting and major impacts to both the owner of the organization, and if you're Tony Khan, it could even fall back on your dad's football. Who are they? The Florida Panthers?
Jacksonville Jaguars.
Right, it was a Florida team.
The Florida Panthers is NHL. Come on, you've watched enough football with me at this point. You should at least know the team that is owners of AEW.
You know that if I watch any athletic endeavor that's not professional wrestling, my eyes gloss over.
Okay. Fun fact, I've actually had to hold a gun to Socket's head and force him to watch NFL with me.
It was a Lego rifle, but it was scary as shit.
It was a great Lego rifle.
So, let's get off of this topic and keep talking about AEW. We've pretty much seen a good build-up for All In. It's All In that's coming up at Wembley, right? It's not All Out?
I have one gripe with the card, but yes, it's All In.
Danielson and Swerve. I think Danielson's going to win it. I think this will be his last title, and then he should probably go off and do creative and be talent management. I think he's the right guy for that. He's well respected.
Transitional champion, and I know exactly what you do with that. Continue.
MJF and Ospreay, which I think is going to be excellent. I'm wondering if they'll give that a second hour or not.
Probably not, no.
Mercedes Moné and Britt Baker, and I heard Mercedes Moné go, I told you I wanted to face anybody but Britt. I think Britt's the right person to come in and take down Mercedes Moné. I don't think Mercedes Moné's in the right place right now.
You know what? With Britt, I think she's in a kind of an interesting position. I think she's just always going to be permanently over with AEW because she was the first female signee. I'd like to see her beat Mercedes Moné, but I'm also not the biggest Mercedes Moné fan. I'm excited for MJF and Will Ospreay. If it's anything like the first one, oh my god, that's a banger. Toni Storm versus Mariah May, I think, has potential to be the best women's story in AEW history. Danielson and Swerve, I'm excited for. I do have one gripe with the build, and that's because I feel like there's been no build. Like, this should matter. Meanwhile, Swerve and Hangman, when they had that standoff in Blood and Guts, the pop the crowd gave for those two just looking at each other. I'm like, should Hangman be in the main event? I don't know. But reality is, it is what it is. I think the match itself will still deliver. And as long as the match itself delivers, everything else is kind of justified.
So it's going to be for the AEW TNT Championship. What kind of stipulations are on that match?
I don't think they've announced any stipulations yet.
I think Jack Perry and Darby Allin, if there's stipulations, one of them could get severely injured. And the last match that I see announced is Toni Storm and Mariah May.
Yes.
Now, Scott Steiner, of all people, just said that there's no story in AEW. It's just violence and wrestling and fighting.
Yeah, I saw that. And I saw Sean Ross Sapp responding to that. And he said, and I don't remember exactly, but he said something along the lines of, well, there are stories. You may not be a fan of them, but by all technicalities, there are stories.
I think Mariah May and Toni Storm is the perfect example of a wrestling story for AEW.
Swerve and Hangman, like I just mentioned.
Think about this one. Timeless Toni Storm brings out this person that she's mentoring, gives her wings, gives her confidence, teaches her a moveset.
And then she gets stabbed in the back.
Yes. No, she teaches you that no good deed goes unpunished.
Listen, Hangman and Swerve. Swerve broke into Hangman's house. He did all these terrible things to Hangman, and the fans cheer for him. And if you're Hangman, it's like, how can you cheer for this guy that's done so many terrible things? I love heels with a cause. But yeah, they have stories. It's hard not to say. Granted, maybe not all the stories hit. Maybe not every single one's been great, but over 5 years, AEW has produced some really good stories. Arguably the best story in their entire company's history was MJF versus CM Punk.
You know what was a great story, speaking of MJF?
Who?
MJF and Cole. Best friends, the devil, the turning on him.
That pisses me off.
Because of the double injuries?
Not even the double injuries. It's more so Cole's injury than MJF's, because it was great. It was amazing. It main evented Wembley for a reason last year. The reason it went off the rails is because Cole was so injured to the point that he could not walk. The reason why Punk is still able to do all the things he's been able to do with Drew is because he has the ability to walk. Otherwise, how does he run into the ring? How does he hit him with the chair at Money in the Bank? It's hard when you need a talent to push a story forward, but that talent can't physically be there.
Oh, yeah, and then you've put all your eggs in this basket, and then the basket falls apart on you.
It was piss poor luck, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's as simple as that. I don't think it ended the way it should have, but I think that's less to do with them failing to execute the story and more along the lines of, oh, one half of this story got injured and we're just kind of scrambling to pivot.
I want to call them the Undisputed Era, but I don't think they're using that term anymore. I know that's like NXT from 4 or 5 years ago.
Undisputed Kingdom.
But it was a saving grace that Adam Cole was able to go off of TV, but continue to have the Undisputed Kingdom, Undisputed Era, Undisputed whatever the fuck you want to call them, continue to come in and represent him at least while that story was kind of on the sidelines. Because they were able to at least further the story while Cole was injured and not completely do away with it.
Roderick Strong screaming Adam was pretty hilarious, I'm not gonna lie.
Adam!
We're all over the place.
Rhea's back. She's asserting her dominance again. We saw that scene on TV where Dominic told her he hated Liv and he cussed her out in Spanish.
I cried, man. I was emotional.
I still think that Dominic's going to go to Liv and he's going to end up apologizing, and I still think that there's going to be some kind of Damian and Rhea.
And Carlito.
Maybe Carlito. I don't know. Carlito just seems like he's there. It feels like they had to replace R-Truth with somebody, and so they just picked a guy that likes to spit apples in people's faces. Every time you see him, he's playing video games.
Dude, you gotta show up, play video games, and be part of a prominent story role.
It's actually, you're not wrong about that. But Rhea, Damian, One Island. I think that it's either going to be Finn and Liv and JD McDonough, with or without Carlito, and then maybe Dominic on his own, or Dominic and Liv. But they're all going to go in different directions by the end of this year.
I could see a scenario where it's Dom, Damian, and Rhea versus JD, Finn, and Liv. But I say that more so because then it opens up the possibility of a 6-man tag.
Interesting. That could be a good War Games, you know that?
Well, War Games is going to be the Samoan Civil War.
You're right. That's what it's got to be.
So maybe you could get away with it since the females always have a War Games, but only having 2 female representatives,
So does Roman come in, reunite the Usos, bring in a 4th person, and then go 4-on-4 against...
I think it'll probably be Roman, the Usos, and Sammy versus Solo, the Tongans, and Jacob Fatu.
There's too many damn Samoans. There should be somebody other than Sami Zayn that can take that role.
Yeah, but it makes the most sense, right?
I guess. I mean, I'd
Who else are you going to put in there? Paul Heyman?
You're reading my mind. I think he'd be great in that role.
Oh, yeah. Give him a steel chair.
Just, armor him up, give him a bunch of weapons, and let him just be like a power fatty.
Let him cook.
Let him cook! But let's go back to Rhea and Liv. I don't think this is the end. I think this is going to keep getting needled out. We'll see what happens tomorrow, July 28th on Raw. This is going to continue, and this is the go-home show for Raw ahead of SummerSlam. So if something doesn't happen tomorrow night, and it doesn't happen Saturday, August 3rd, then it will at least happen on the 5th, the Monday.
I think it's going to happen at SummerSlam. It's the second biggest pay-per-view of the year.
Oh, yeah, you're probably not wrong about that. It's the right place for it. It's the right format.
They've done a great job building it up. They've done a great job teasing it. I still think one way or the other, the smart call is Liv Morgan retains. How she retains is probably in some sort of screwy finish. How that looks, I don't know.
And that right there will be the thing that separates the Judgment Day, or at the very least, it will be the first straw. Because you can already see that Finn and Damian are needling each other. Finn and Dominic are needling each other. Which Uso was it that was flirting with Rhea? And
Jimmy.
One person said, you got to get him back, and the other person was like, use your head.
Jimmy.
So they all have conflicting opinions. They're not on the same page anymore.
This is my other thing, too. I know I just mentioned the 6-man tag, but I think Jimmy Uso could somehow slide in there and be like Damian, Rhea, and Jimmy versus Balor, Dom, and Morgan.
He could, but do we want him to be that guy?
I've never bought into Jimmy Uso as a main eventer, honestly.
Jimmy Uso...
I think he has a fun entrance, and that's it.
Jimmy Uso, I think, is a perfect permanent tag team guy. He's got a perfect tag team partner that he works better with than against. They have a good look for a tag, and I can't see them doing anything other than tag work and being in part of big factions. He's charismatic, he can get a crowd going, you get everybody waving their hands, but... We saw him fight his brother, and we've seen some of the one-on-one stuff he's doing, and it's not that exciting.
There's some teams that go on to have great individual success, like DX. There's some teams where one person does better than the others, like Michaels and Jannetty. And then there's some teams that are just meant to be together forever.
Don't forget, DX was already established long before that. That was more establishing for Triple H, who was coming from that, like, Connecticut blue blood gimmick. But Triple H had already started to establish himself, and HBK was long down that road. He had already had those feuds with Taker, Brett. He'd done some stuff with Diesel. He'd done some stuff with Razor. By this point, he was 6 or 7 years into his WWF run, and he had already been elsewhere as well. So I don't know if that's the right comparison. I mean, think about the Steiner brothers.
What about the Shield then? I know that's more of a faction, but they all went on to have great individual success.
Oh, yeah, and that's because they were all... But think about the Steiner brothers.
I'd say Scott. I was going to say Rick. Scott had more success than Rick.
Exactly. But when they were a tag team together, they were both great work rate powerhouses. In 1989 or 1990, when Scott and Rick were over at WWF, I think that was for the Road Warriors, but I could be misremembering who they worked. They wanted to give Scott a singles run, and Scott said, no, I want to stay with my brother.
Yeah, but...
Flash forward 6 or 7 years later, Scott did better after he did that gimmick change and went off and became the Big Bad Booty Daddy.
Blonde, dude, I'm not going to lie. When I found out that Rick before and after steroids... Scott before and after steroids were the same person, it kind of blew my mind a little bit, and I didn't believe it. Went from having long brown hair of a mullet to short, blonde, with muscles the size of my head.
You know what he did with that look, with the Big Bad Booty Daddy? He effectively ripped off Superstar Billy Graham.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, so did Hogan.
Yes. And it's funny because they were doing the same rip-off at the same time.
Everybody's a ripoff of someone in wrestling.
Oh, yeah. Do you think Ric Flair is the original Nature Boy?
He got his nickname from, who was it, Buddy Rogers?
Buddy Rogers or Buddy Rose?
And then both of them got inspiration from Gorgeous George.
Yeah, there was Buddy Rogers, and there was also Buddy Landel that was a Nature Boy, I think. Yeah, Buddy Landel looked like the worst of the Nature Boys. Like, you could see he's just trying to rip off Rick, and he doesn't have the right look or put together.
Woo!
He's even wearing a robe here, and it just, like... The hair, the robe, it looks like he's trying to be something he's not. But we were talking about tag teams, and we were talking about what's going to happen next with Rhea and Dominic, and I think this is a good place to leave it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share, post us on Reddit. Subscribe to the email so that you know when the next episode's coming out. We haven't started sending those yet because not enough people have subscribed to the email. And we'll see you next time.